Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. While I choke on my drink. Oh, what a day today, huh? Woke up super nice out, a little bit of rain, then it got beautiful sunshine, then it rained, then it got to be nice sunshine, then it rained. Went out for a nice walk today, real nice long walk, and I got about a quarter mile left in my walk, and it poured on me like I have not seen rain like this, excuse me, in quite a long time. It really came down hard. But you know what? I'm not a witch, so I didn't melt. So, yesterday, I can't wait to get to talk about current events today because what a nutty day. A real nutty day in the world of politics. Um, I don't know. I almost didn't believe some of the things I saw, but we'll get to that later. Last night, our family got their house. Right, they were very worried. They were very much so thought that they were going to get hoodwinked. They thought that they were going to give this money, and they were worried that the contract that they had turned in was going to prove to be false and fake. But alas, it did not, and they got their house. They're packed, living in the house, but they've got their house. So let's read on. Whoops. Jorgis had made some friends by this time, and he sought out one of them and asked them what this meant. The friend, who was named Tamos, was a sharp little man who folded hides on the killing beds, and he listened to what Jorgis had to say, and was to say without seemingly at all surprised. They were common enough, he said, such cases of petty graft. It was simply some boss who proposed to add a little to his income. Oh, that's right. They're talking about, right, his father is getting a job, but the only way that he's going to get the job is if he kicks back some money. After Jorgis had been there a while, he would know that the plants were simply honeycombed with the rottenness. Oh, and unions too. That's right. Jorgis had learned about the unions. After Jorgis had been there a while, excuse me, he would know that the plants were simply honeycombed with rottenness of that sort. The bosses grafted off the men, and they grafted off each other. And someday the superintendent would find out about the boss. Then he would graft off that boss. Warming to the subject, Tamos went on to explain the situation. Here was Durham's, for instance, owned by a man who was trying to make as much money out of it as he could, and he did not care at the least how he did it. And underneath him ranged in ranks and grades like an army, managers, superintendents, foremans. Oh my goodness, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Each one driving the man next below him and trying to squeeze out him as much work as possible. And all the men of the same rank were pitted against each other. The accounts of each were kept separately, and every man lived in terror of losing his job if another made a better record than he. So from top to the bottom, the place was simply a seething cauldron of jealousness and hatred. There was no loyalty or decency anywhere about it. There was no place in it where a man could be counted for anything against $1. And worse than there being no decency, there was not even honesty. The reason for that? Who could say? It must have been old Durham in the beginning. Oh my goodness. Oh, excuse me, my friends. It was a heritage which the self-made merchant had left to his son, along with his millions. Jorgis would find out these things for himself if he stayed there long enough. It was the men who had to do all these dirty jobs, and so there was no deceiving them, and they caught the spirit of the place, and did like all the rest. Jorgis had come there and thought he was going to make himself useful and rise and become a skilled man. But he would soon find out his error, for nobody rose in Packingtown by doing good work. You could lay that down for a rule. If you met a man who was rising in Packingtown, you met a knave. That man who had been sent to Jorgis's father by the boss, he would rise. The man who told tales and spied upon his fellows would rise. But the man who minded his own business and did his own work, why, they would speed him up till they had worn him out. Then they would throw him into the gutter. Jorgis went home with his head buzzing, yet he could not bring himself to believe such things. No, it could not be so. Tamos was simply another of the grumblers. He was a man who spent all of his time fiddling, and he would go to parties at night and not get home until sunrise. And so, of course, he did not feel like work. Then, too, he was a puny little chap, and so he had been left behind in the race. And that was why he was sore. And yet so many strange things kept coming to Jorgis's notice every day. He tried to persuade his father to have nothing to do with the offer, but old Antinos had begged until he was worn out, and all his courage was gone. He wanted a job, any sort of job. So the next day he went and he found the man who had spoken to him and promised to bring him a third of all of what he earned. In that same day he was put to work in Durham's cellars. It was a pickle room where there was never a dry spot to stand on. And so he had to take nearly the whole of his first week's earnings to buy himself a pair of heavy-soled boots. He was a squeegee man. His job was to go around all day with a long-handled mop, swabbing up the floor. Except that it was damp and dark. It was not a pleasant job in the summer. Now Antinos was the meekest man that could ever be put on the earth. And so Jorgis found a striking confirmation of what all men said, that his father had been at work only 2 days before he had come home, bitter as any of them, and cursing Durham's with all the power of his soul. For they had set him to cleaning out the traps, and the family sat around and listened in wonder while he told them what that meant. It seemed that he was working in the room where the men prepared the beef for canning, and the beef had lain in vats full of chemicals, and the men with great forks speared out and dumped them into the trucks to be taken to the cooking room, where they had been speared out and speared out all they could reach. They emptied the vat on the floor. Then with shovels they scraped the balance and dumped it into the truck. This floor was filthy. Yet they set Antinos with his mop, slopping up the pickle into the hole that connected with a sink, where it was caught and used over again and again forever. As if that were not enough, there was a trap in the pipe, where all the scraps of meats and odds and ends of refuse were caught. And every few days the old man's task was to clean it out and shovel their contents into one of the trucks with the rest of the meat. So all these chemicals that the meat are sitting in, they're just reusing them every single time. They're just reusing them and reusing them and reusing them. The pickling chemicals and any of the meat that just kind of gets trapped and left over, chuck it in the truck. It'll be fine. It's all going to get ground up anyway. Yum. This was the experience of Antinos. And then there was also Jonas and Marija with tales to tell. Marija was working for one of the independent packers and was quite besides herself and outrageous with triumph over the sums of money she was making as a painter of cans. But one day she walked home with a pale-faced little woman who worked opposite of her. Oh boy, Jadviga Markinikus by name. And Jadviga told her how she, Marija, had chanced to get her job. She had taken the place of an Irishwoman who had been working in the factory ever since one could remember, for over 15 years, so she declared. Mary Dennis was her name, and a long time ago she had been seduced and had a little boy. She was a cripple and an epileptic, but still he was a cripple and an epileptic, but still he was all that she had in the world to love. And they had lived in a little room alone somewhere on Halsted Street, where the Irish were. Mary had had consumption, and all day long you might hear her coughing as she worked. Of late, she had been going all to pieces, and when Marijah came, the forelady had suddenly decided to turn her off. The forelady had come to a certain standard for herself and could not stop for sick people. Yadviga explained. The fact that Mary had been there so long had not made any difference to her. It was doubtful if she ever knew that, for both the forelady and the superintendent were new people, having only been there for 2 or 3 years themselves. Yadviga did not know what had become of the poor creature. It was not fit work for a woman handling 14-pound cans all day. It was a striking circumstances that Jonas too had gotten his job by the misfortune of another person. Jonas pushed a truck loaded with hams from the smoke rooms to the elevator, and thence to the packing rooms. The trucks were all iron and heavy, and they put about 60 ham on each of them, a load of more than a quarter of a ton. On the uneven floor, it was a task for a man to start one of these trucks, unless he was a giant. And when it was once started, he naturally tried his best to keep it going. There was always the boss prowling about, and if there was a second's delay, he would fall to cursing. Lithuanians and Slovaks and such, who could not understand what was said to them, the bosses won't want to kick about the place like so many dogs. Therefore, these trucks went for the most part on the run, and the predecessor of Jonas had been jammed against the wall by one and crushed in a horrible and nameless manner. So, in class, we had talked about the ruthless practices of our three, later philanthropists, but our robber barons, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and Rockefeller. And Carnegie was probably the most ruthless of them all. But here's just another example. Hey, this dude got crushed, pushing around, a quarter ton of hams. Oh, well, see you later. We'll find somebody else to do the job. That's that. That's not business today, right? At least it shouldn't be. And for the most part, it isn't. But at the time, that's what it was. All of these were sinister, innocent. Excuse me. Oh, let me have a quick drink here. I switched back to seltzer, by the way. I had been drinking Diet Ginger Ale for a while, but back to good old seltzer. All of these were sinister incidents, but they were trifles compared to what Jorgis saw with his own eyes before long. One curious thing that he had noticed the very first day in his profession of shoveler of guts, which was a sharp trick of the floor bosses whenever they chanced to have a slunk calf. Any man who knows anything about butchering knows that the flesh of a cow that is about to calve or has been calved is not fit for food. A good many of these came every day on the packing houses. And of course, if they had been chosen, it would have been an easy matter for the packers to keep them till they were fit for food. But for saving of time and fodder, it was the law that cows of that sort came along with the others, and whoever noticed it would tell the boss. And the boss would start up a conversation with a government meat inspector, and the two would stroll away. So in thrice the carcass of the cow would be cleaned out, and the entrails would have vanished. It was Jorgis's task to slide them into the trap, calves and all. And on the floor below, they took out these slunk calves and butchered them for meat, and used them, even the skins of them. One day a man slipped and hurt his leg. That afternoon, it was the last of the cattle had been disposed of. The men were leaving. Jorgis was ordered to remain and do some special work until this injured man had usually done. It was late, almost dark, and the government inspectors had all gone. There were only a dozen or two of men on the floor. That day they had killed 4,000 cattle, and these cattle had come straight from trains from far-off states. Some of them had got hurt. There were some with broken legs and some with gored sides. There were others that had died. For what cause, none could say. And they were all to be disposed of, here in the darkness and silence. Downers, the men called them, and the packing house had a special elevator upon which they were raised to the killing beds, where the gang proceeded to handle them, with an air of businesslike nonchalance, which had plainer than any words that in any manner of everyday routine. It took a couple of hours to get them out of the way, and in the end, Yorgis saw them go into the chilling rooms with the rest of the meat, being carefully scattered here and there so that none of them could be identified. When he came home that night, he was in a very somber mood, having begun to see, at last, how those might be right who had laughed at him in his faith to go to America. So, they're killing pregnant cows, and when the unborn calves come out, they're slaughtering them for meat too. Now they're saying that when the cows that have been damaged or hurt or not good for use, they separate them. But then at the end of the day, when the government people are gone, they use them anyways. Well, and finally, Yorgis is kind of seeing that maybe I'm kind of working for a bunch of scumbags. But knowing Yorgis, he's saying, at least I'm working. Yorgis and Ona were very much in love. We're in chapter 6, sorry. They were very much in love. They had waited a long time. It was now well into the second year, and Yorgis judged everything by the criterion of its helping or hindering their union. All his thoughts were there. He accepted the family because it was a part of Ona, and he was interested in the house because it was to be Ona's home. Even the trick and cruelties he saw in Durham's had little meaning for him just then, save as they might happen to affect his future with Ona. The marriage would have been at once if they had had their way, but this would mean that they would have to do without the wedding feast. When they suggested this, they came into conflict with the old people. To Teta especially, and the very suggestion was an affliction. What, she would cry, to be married on the roadside like a parcel of beggars? No, no, no. Elizabeta had some traditions behind her. She had been a person of importance in her childhood, had lived on a big estate with servants, and might have been married well for a lady, but for the fact that there had been 9 daughters and no sons in the family. Even so, however, she knew what was decent and clung to her traditions with desperation. They were not going to lose all caste, even if they had come to be unskilled laborers in Packingtown. And that Ona had been talked of omitting the Vesila was enough to keep her stepmother lying awake at night. It was in vain for them to say that they had so few friends. They were bound to have friends in time, and the friends would talk about it. They must not give up what was right for a little money if they did. The money would never do them any good. They could depend on that. And Elizabeta would call upon Dede to support her. There was a fear in the souls of these two, lest the journey to a new country might somehow undermine the old home virtues of their children. The very first Sunday they had been taken to Mass, and poor as they were, Elizabeta had felt it advisable to invest a little of her resources in a representation of the Babe of Bethlehem, made in plaster and painted in brilliant colors. Though it was only a foot high, there was a shrine with 4 snow-white steeples, and the Virgin standing with her child in her arms, and the kings and the shepherds and wise men all bowing down before him. It had cost 50 cents, but Elizabetha had a feeling that money spent for such things was not to be counted too closely. It would come back in hidden ways. The piece was beautiful on the parlor mantel, and one could not have a home without some sort of ornament. So she's buying, kind of like a nativity scene, right? Or a part of a nativity scene. And she's not really looking at it as money wasted. This is something that they use to, support their Lord, their God, and their religion. The cost of the wedding feast would, of course, be returned to them. Going back to talking about the wedding. They had been in the neighborhood so short a time that they could not get much credit, and there was no one except Svedvilas from whom they could borrow even a little. Evening after evening, Jorgis and Ona would sit and figure the expenses. Calculating the term of their separation, they could not possibly manage it decently for less than $200. And even though they were welcome to count in the whole thing of the earnings of Malaysia and Jonas as a loan, they could not hope to raise the sum in less than 4 or 5 months. So Ona began to think of seeking employment of her own, saying that if she had even an ordinary good luck, she might be able to take 2 months off the time. They were just beginning to adjust themselves to this necessity when out of the clear sky there fell a thunderbolt upon them, a calamity that scattered all their hopes to the four winds. About a block away from there lived another Lithuanian family, consisting of an elderly widow and one grown son. Their name was, oh boy, Majuskis, and our friend struck up an acquaintance with them before long. One evening they came over for a visit, and naturally the first subject upon which the conversation turned was the neighborhood and its history. Then grandmother Majuskian, as the old lady was called, proceeded to recite to them a string of horrors that fairly froze their blood. She was a wrinkled up and wizened personage. She must have been 80, and she mumbled the grim story through her toothless gums. She seemed a very old witch to them. Grandmother Majuskian had lived in the midst of misfortune too long that it had come to be her element, and she talked about starvation and sickness and death as other people might talk about weddings and holidays. The thing came gradually. In the first place, as to the house they had bought, it was not new at all, as they had supposed. It was about 15 years old, and there was nothing new about it but the paint, which had been so bad that it needed to be put on every year or two. The house was one of a whole row that was built by a company which existed to make money by swindling poor people. The family had paid $1,500 for it, and it had not cost the builders more than 500 when it was new. Grandmother Juskieni knew that because her son belonged to a political organization, which the contractor who had put up exactly the same houses. They used the very flimsiest and cheapest materials. They built a dozen houses at a time. They cared about nothing at all except the outside shine. The family could take her word as the trouble they would have, for she had been through it all. She and her son had bought their house in exactly the same way. They had fooled the company, however, for her son was a skilled man who made as high as $100 a month. And as he had had sense enough not to marry, they had been able to pay for the house right out. Grandmother Majewski saw that her friends were puzzled at this remark. They did not quite see how paying for the house was fooling the company. Evidently, they were very inexperienced. Cheap as houses were, they were sold with the idea that people who bought them would not be able to pay for them. When they failed, if it were only a single month, they would lose the house and all that they had paid on it, and that the company would sell it over again. And they did not often get a chance to do that. Diev, grandmother raised her hands. They did it. How often, no one could say, but certainly more than half of the time. They might ask anyone who knew anything about Packingtown as to that. She had been living there ever since the house was built, and she could tell them all about it. She had been, and had it ever been sold before? Why, since it had been built, no less than four families that their informant could name had tried to buy it, had tried to buy it and failed. She would tell them a little about it. The first family had been Germans. The family had all been from different nationalities. There had been a representative of several races that had displaced each other in the stockyards. Grandmother had come to America with her son at a time, so far as she knew, where they were the only other Lithuanian family in the district. The workers had been Germans then, skilled cattle butchers, that the packers had brought from abroad to start the business. Afterward, as cheap labor had come, these Germans moved away. The next were Irish. There had been 6 or 8 years when Packingtown had been a regular Irish city. There are a few colonies of them still here, enough to run all the unions in the police force and to get the graft. But most of who were working here in the packing houses had gone away and not dropping wages after the big strike. The Bohemians had come then, and after them the Poles. People said that the old man Durham himself was responsible for these immigrations. He had sworn that he would fix people of Packingtown so that they would never again call to strike on him. And so he had sent his agents to every city and village in Europe to spread the tale of the chances of work and high wages at the stockyards. The people had come in hordes, and old Durham had squeezed them tighter and tighter, speeding them up and grinding them into pieces and sending them for new ones. The Poles who had come by tens and thousands had been driven to the wall by the Lithuanians, and now the Lithuanians were giving way to the Slovaks. Who was the poorer and more miserable than the Slovaks? Grandmother Mazuzkiene had no idea, but the packers would find them, never fear. It was easy to bring them, for the wages were really much higher, and it was only when it was too late that the poor people found out that everything else was higher too. They were like rats in a trap, and that was the truth. The more of them were piling in every day. By and by, they would have their revenge, though, for one thing was getting beyond human endurance, and the people would rise and murder the packers. Grandmother was a socialist, or some strange thing. Another son of hers was working in the mines in Siberia, and the old lady herself had made speeches in her time, which made her seem all the more terrible to her present auditors. They called her back to the story of the house. The German family had been a good sort. To be sure, there had been a great many of them, which was a common failing in Packingtown. But they had all worked hard, and the father had been a steady man. They had a good deal more than half paid for the house. But he had been killed in an elevator accident in Durham's. Then there had come the Irish. There had been lots of them too. The husband drank and beat the children. The neighbors could hear them shrieking any night. They were behind with their rent all the time, but the company was good to them. There was some politics back of that, grandmother said, and they could not just say what. But the Laffertys had belonged to the War Whoop League, which was a sort of a political club of all things, and rowdies in the district. And if you belong to that, you can never be arrested for anything. Once upon a time, old Lafferty had been caught with a gang that had stolen cows from several of the poor people in the neighborhood and butchered them in an old shanty back of the yards and sold them. He had been in jail only 3 days and had come out laughing, and not even had lost his place, and not even had he lost his place in the packing house. He had gone all to ruin with drink, however, lost his power, one of his sons, who was a good man, and kept him and his family up for a year or two. But then he had got sick with consumption. We'll do one more page and then we'll call it for the night. That was another thing. Grandmother interrupted herself. This house was just unlucky. Every family that lived in it, someone was sure to get consumption. Nobody could tell us why that was. There must be something about the house or the way it was built. Some folks said it was because the building had been begun in the dark of the moon. There were dozens of houses that way in Packingtown. Sometimes there would be a particular room in which you could point out. If anyone slept in that room, he was just as good as dead. With this house, it had been the Irish first. Then the Bohemian family had lost a child of it. Though, to be sure, that was uncertain, since it was hard to tell what the matter with the children who worked in the yards. In those days, there had been no law about the age of children. The packers had worked all but the babies. All this remark, the family looked puzzled, and grandmother again had to make an explanation that it was against the law for children to work before they were 16. What was the sense of that? They asked. They had been thinking of letting little Stanislavs go to work. Well, there was no need to worry, grandmother said. The law made no difference except that it forced people to lie about the ages of their children. One would like to know what the lawmakers expected them to do. There were families that had no possible means to support except with their children, and the law provided them no other way of getting a living. Very often, a man could get no work in Packingtown for months, while a child could go and get a place easily. There was always some new machine by which the packers could get as much work out of a child as they had been able to out of a man, and all they had to pay was a third. To come back to the house again, it was the woman of the next family that had died. That was after they had been out nearly 4 years. The woman had had twins regularly every year. Holy moly, twins every year? Yikes. There had been more than you could count when they moved in. After she died, the man would go to work all day and leave them to shift for themselves. The neighbors would help now and then, for they would almost freeze to death. At the end, there were 3 days that they were alone before it was found out that the father was dead. He was a floorsman at Jones's and wounded a steer and it had broken loose and mashed him against the pillar. Then the children had been taken away, and the company had sold the house the very same week to a party of immigrants. Well, this book is just cheerful, isn't it? Okay. We are doing good. We are cruising along. I don't know. I'll have to look. I'm reading it. Like I told you guys, I'm reading on the Kindle, so I'm not 100% sure how I can figure out how far through the book we are, but I think we're about a third of the way through. But we'll have to take a look. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. So here we go. What happened today in the news? Well, my friends, we have officially gone over in the last 24 hours, we have officially gone over 10,000 New Yorkers that have passed away because of the coronavirus. A little under 700 people died today. So I guess we'll see what happens tomorrow. But, I think 3 days ago was the highest we hit. And now it's starting to come down a little bit, but with these numbers, we really want to see it over time. One day of them dipping down, excuse me, does not really tell us all. So this morning in the press conference, it really wasn't that long, but Governor Cuomo said that, let me see, I wrote it down. He said, it seems as though we can start toward a path to normalcy. So it looks like, he believes that we are headed in the right direction, though he has continued to say every day. And I hope people remember it, that the only way we're going to keep going in this trajectory is if we social distance. If we start to let up, things are not going to be good, right? We need to, or they're not going to continue to go good. We need to social distance. So I know a lot of people are maybe we'll be back to school soon, and maybe it won't be out for the year. And I don't know. I really don't. I tend to think that it's still going to be a while. I don't think we're going to be back on May 1st. I heard a lot of people throwing around, and this is not government people. This is people I know throwing around that date, but I don't know. When he held this earlier press conference, he said, well, we're going to have a 2:00 press conference. And he really kind of made it seem like there was going to be some big announcements and that we were going to hear some real plans, right? The questions continue to roll out. How are we going to do it? And I think the governor's really done a really good idea. or I'm sorry, he's got some good ideas, and he's saying we have to look at everything. Number one, the big thing for him is that we can't open up every single job, because if we do, well, where are all the kids going to go if the schools aren't open? So obviously, some schools or schools themselves are going to have to be open. Things are going to kind of have to roll out slowly, and kind of incrementally. And we've got to make sure that a little bit of everything is opened up. Like, transportation around the state is shut down. Obviously schools have shut down. All the companies that supply schools, at least for everything outside of food, have kind of come to a halt. So, we've got to kind of like slowly turn on the faucet, and we've got to make sure that everything is kind of moving out slowly, and then just kind of continue to slowly open it up and twist it open, and let the pressure flow. But he also brought up today, now when they look back at like everything is it Rockland County, they know one person infected hundreds in one religious service. So think about that. One person went into a religious service and was sick, and that one person then gave it to hundreds of people. So if this isn't really on the right way, it's not headed the right way, and one person walks into CAF B with it, right? Whoa, right? That's no bueno, as they say in French class. That is just no bueno. And of course, I'm joking. That should be Spanish class. I don't know what they would say in French class. Probably some kind of ha 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 ha, But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I think he's going back and forth. I think, and I've said this before, making the decision on the other side is going to be 100 times harder than the decision to really shut things down. But anyway, so he said, well, we're going to have this later press conference, and it seemed like, we were going to start getting some news about how things were going to reopen. And this 2 p.m. press conference, I don't know how many people saw it, but basically he had 5 other governors. He had the governor of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Connecticut. Did I say Connecticut? Connecticut, sorry. Let me count again. Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and himself, 6. And they talked about how they are starting basically like a committee of people to work together out of all of those states to really make a decision about how to get this going. And one of the things they kept bringing up was I-95. So I don't know how many of you guys know about I-95. I-95 goes from Bangor, Maine, all the way down to, I believe, Miami. And it goes down, so it cuts down right through the edge of Boston. Then it cuts through Providence. Then it cuts through most of southern Connecticut. Then it goes through New York City. Then it goes through New Jersey, skims, Philadelphia, and off to Delaware. So obviously, this is a big transportation hub, and they believe that this is one of the ways that the disease is being transmuted, whether it's through trade or people or whatever. So that's why these governors are working together, right? We can't, and I don't know why Massachusetts isn't really being included. Now, you might have guessed, all 6 of those governors, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, are Democrats. The current governor of Massachusetts, is a Republican. So, one of the things that Governor Cuomo talked about today is he said that all decisions moving forward to reopen the economy need to be based on science. However, and not politics. However, I think not including this governor, it's a little bit of playing politics, right? They keep talking about it's not about party, it's not about this side of the aisle, that side of the aisle. It's about the sickness and getting through it, and we're Americans. But I don't know. I don't know. That's all I'm saying. I just don't know. So, anyways, we didn't get any word today. Excuse me, and I don't know. I think it's still going to be a while. What I kind of got from this is that this committee of people, they could have a decision within a week or two. So they could have like a plan. And that plan, I think, is again just going to say that when we see the numbers are doing X, Y, and Z, then we're going to start to do A, B, and C. And I don't know if opening schools is going to be a part of that ABC. I just don't know. But what I do know is that I got contacted from summer school today, and they are doing it. So everybody that is, sitting back and not doing their work, I hate to tell you that you're sitting back and thinking that, oh, there's not going to be any summer school this year. I'm going to pass. Blah blah blah. I hate to tell you, my friends, but there's going to be summer school, and this guy is going to be there. So speaking about politics now, and again, I'm not going to bash President Trump here, but I think today he kind of came off the rails a little bit, and I don't blame him, right? I think that Governor Cuomo has at times this week been stressed out, and you can kind of see that. Oh, excuse me. I think this is with everybody, right? You're pushing their buttons, and finally they kind of get to a point where, they're just ready to go and ready to break, and he's gotten close. But the president today, I just encourage you guys to go out and to watch the press conference from later this afternoon. He definitely, and again, I don't blame him. I think the pressure of being the president is insane. The pressure of being a president through all of this has got to be twice as bad. But he's just starting, he's yelling at reporters, and I don't mean like, he's really going after reporters. I don't know if you look at him, if you say, well, is he really being presidential? I don't know, but I encourage you all to go and look. One of the things that happened today was that he, at one point during the press conference, he played, basically they made a Trump commercial to play during the coronavirus briefing. And what this little commercial did was it showed all these local news agencies that around the country were, saying, hey, President Trump is doing a good job of handling what's going on with the coronavirus. So apparently at that point, and this was later on in the press conference, a bunch of news agencies dropped it because they were like, well, we didn't come here to see this propaganda machine. We didn't come here to see, we want answers about this disease. Or this virus. We don't want to see a Trump 2020 election campaign commercial. So typically news agencies don't just like drop presidents during their briefings, but a couple did. And here's a couple things that he is talking about doing. He is saying that one of the things he wants to do is he wants to delay the census, right? So the U.S. Census, every 10 years, we count how many Americans there are. We find out demographic information about America. We find out where people are living so that we can adjust what? We can adjust representation. We can adjust how many representatives there are in the House of Representatives. We've talked about in class at least a few times. New York now has 27 representatives in the House. You guys live in the 20th district. I live in the 19th. And we think that New York's population has now dipped enough where we're probably going to lose at least one, maybe two representatives because our population is shrinking. But we'll see. But he wants to delay it. So I'm not 100% sure. I read a couple articles on it, and it seems as though he's just kind of, I guess, hinting at that there's just too much going on right now, and we should not focus on the census. So I don't know. I know the department, the Census Bureau has been hiring people for almost a year already to get the census ready and going. I have not gotten my census stuff in the mail yet, but my dad did. So this is, we need to do this, right? We need to do this every 10 years. But he wants to delay it. And I don't remember what committee in Congress will make a recommendation on it. I should have written it down and I didn't. But Congress can work with the president to delay the census. And one of the things they're kicking around right now is maybe delaying it for 120 days. So, in the grand scheme of things, what they do is they collect all the census data, but then it usually takes about a good year for them to really go through it and get it all figured out. And then it takes another year for them to adjust the congressional district. So it won't be until 2022 when we really start to see an adjustment because of the census that took place this year. Now, the other thing, he said a couple other things today. And again, I encourage you guys to go watch the newscast. And again, I appreciate the amount of pressure he's under, but something happened today in this press. I wish that there was a way that I could roll out clips while I'm going live, and there probably is a way for me to do it. But he just really lost it today. And one of the things that he said was this: everything we did was right. So a lot of experts are coming out and saying, hey, we had this information. Dr. Fauci has come out and said, I gave the administration this information. Maybe it was back in late November, early December. We got to watch out for this. And, Trump is defending that President Trump is defending that the way the federal government handled everything, they did it right. So he was throwing out dates. Like on January 17th, there was the first case in America, no deaths. A couple days later, this many cases, still no deaths. So he's kind of looking at the timetable and saying, when do you call it? When do you say it's really a problem? But so anyways, when you go look for that part of it, because that's part of when he kind of comes a little unhinged and he starts yelling at this one reporter. And he says something about, that's a nasty way to ask a question. And I don't know, the comment was a little, it was just a little odd. And then he said in the newscast tonight, he said this: when somebody is president of the United States, your authority is total. Well, my friends, if you've learned anything this year in the United States history class that we've all been sharing, that is not the case, right? Everybody that bashes Trump to me, I tell them or I ask them, I say, well, how many letters have you written to your congressman or congresswoman or congressperson? How many times have you reached out to people in the legislative branch to check the things that Trump is doing? And you know what I've heard over all the years of me ever asking that question is nothing, right? Because people forget the type of government we have. We have a government with three branches. And those three branches sometimes are they in collusion? They are, because sometimes all three branches are dominated by a similar party. But um, you know, oftentimes that's not the case. And we have different branches being controlled by different parties. And, these parties are doing everything they can to keep each other in line. And that's when people say, like, oh, well, this legislation is being, backed down, or this legislation is being slowed down, or this should have happened a week ago. And I don't know why they have all this talking to do. Well, that's because we wanted a process where this would happen. We wanted a uh-oh. I don't know if you can hear Miss Stella yelling at me, but she's not happy. I know. You want to come say hi? No? Look, maybe she'll come say hi. Yep. Here we go. So I don't think she'll stay with me. She's not very political. But the this is how we're supposed to be open. We're supposed to argue. We're supposed to debate. We're supposed to criticize. We're supposed to say, hey, I don't like your plan. My plan's better, and this is why. And I think the problem today is that we have just become a society where we want an answer very quickly. We don't want to wait. This money that was coming out for all the small businesses, that were the Democrats blocking it? Were the Democrats holding it up? Yes, they were. The Democrats were holding it up. And all they were saying is, before we let the money out, we just want to make sure that we have some rules in place. That's it. They weren't saying, no, we don't want to help people. They're just saying, we want to make sure, we want to take a little time to figure out and make sure that it rolls out the right way. So I'm personally okay with debate. I'm personally okay with people criticizing one another as long as it's done in a respectful manner. But this is the way things are supposed to be. This is the way things are supposed to work, in my opinion. That's that. Okay, what else do we have? Okay. Oh, excuse me. So the president, now here's the other thing, is that the governors have been talking about when to start to reopen things. And one of the things that Governor Cuomo and these other governors talked about was that they want to have a plan, right? So here's what they don't want to see happen. Governor Cuomo doesn't want to say, hey, New York, here's the deal. We're going to stay in this lockdown situation until June 1st. But then the governor of New Jersey says, hey, May 5th, we're opening up the restaurants again. Because guess what's going to happen? A lot of people live on the New York-New Jersey border. So a lot of New Yorkers are just going to drive over to New Jersey and they're going to drink and they're going to go to the restaurants, which they do anyways, right, when things are normal. And the disease is going to continue to move. The virus is going to continue to move back and forth, back and forth. So, these states want to work together in reopening things. And the president today, who was or had been saying that it should be the states that are making a lot of these decisions, he now came out today and said that no, when he says the country reopens, that's when the country reopens. So, Governor Cuomo addressed this a little bit talking about, and what have we talked about? We've talked about this thing, federalism, right? That the federal government has power and the state governments have power, and then there are power that they share. So when a state declares a state of emergency for whatever reason, the state basically, at the state level, the state says, like, hey, Mayor of Middleburg, sorry, we now supersede you because the entire state is in a state of emergency. Perfect example when Hurricane Irene hit New York. Well, it hit the country and it hit upstate New York, and the Schoharie County got 8 inches of rain in 12 hours. And that's a lot of flipping rain. To put that into perspective, that would be 96 inches of snow. So imagine 96 inches of snow falling in 12 hours. Well, when that hurricane or tropical storm, I still think it was a hurricane, hit, this area was in a state of emergency. And the governor actually had control of this area. So what he said about how things went, and we weren't living under martial law, but the National Guard was here, and the National Guard was running the show for quite some time. And now that this has been declared a national state of emergency, that's why the president is saying now the federal government has control. But the other side of this is that, we are going to be okay, and we are going to be out of this when it's just starting to hit Iowa, right? Or it's going to be peaking in Illinois when we're kind of like just kind of on the tail end of it. So should it be up to the states? Who knows? I think it's going to be a lot of politicking, and I think it's going to be a lot of drama getting things back opened. All right, 10 o'clock. Let's run down our what happened today in history. So on this day in history in 1960, and we talked, or 1860. We talked about this, I believe it was 13 days ago. So the first Pony Express rider lands and it left Missouri and it gets to Sacramento, California on this day in 1860. However, 5 years later in 1865 on this day, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth. And John Wilkes Booth, after he shoots President Lincoln, he jumps off the balcony onto the stage and he yells, "Sic semper tyrannis," right? Down with the tyrant. So not long after that, 5 years after that, in 1870 on this day, oh my goodness, excuse me. The Metropolitan Museum of Art opens, or MoMA, right? What a great place to go and visit down in New York City. Still open today. You can see anything from a Monet to a Van Gogh to a Jackson Pollock, modern art. You can see architects' models. Who was that guy? Frank Lloyd Wright, right? The guy who designed that one house. Is it Falling Water, where the house is designed like right over a river in Pennsylvania? It's really cool. On this day in 1912, the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, sinks. On this day in 1928, the first nonstop flight from America to Europe landed in Europe. So there was no refueling. They had built a plane that could take the trip without actually having to refuel. Now, one of my favorite actors, and he's I don't. Been a while. Well, actually, I think he is. I actually don't know if he's still with us or not. Sidney Poitier is the first African American to win a uh, Academy Award on this day. And I believe the movie was called Lilies in the Field. But he hung around for quite some time, doing little roles here and there in movies. And one of my favorite movies, I believe it came out in 1992 or 1993, called Sneakers, a movie that he did with Robert Redford. Really, really cool movie. Um, and then last but not least, I couldn't find a lot of really cool stuff, modern stuff. Actually, I do have two more. But on this day in 1970, if you've seen that movie Apollo 13 with Kevin Bacon and Tom Hanks, the oxygen tank, right, fails in Apollo 13. They were supposed to land on the moon, but they never did. They did survive. They did make it back. But that was one of those times where the country was looking up towards the stars and praying that these three men would make it back, and thankfully for them and their good wits and good people on the ground here in America, they were able to repair Apollo 13 and come back. And then on this day in 1981, we had talked about the spaceship Columbia had taken off a few days ago, and this is the day where it re-entered and it landed safe back on Earth. So the shuttle program, of course, it was the Challenger, right, which exploded. And I don't remember if I was in 7th or 8th grade, but I remember I was homesick. And, that used to be something that, we watched in school. Whenever a shuttle took off, the teacher would roll out a television on some cart and we would watch it. And it was a really awesome thing. And I remember I was homesick. I was really, really sick. And I was at home and I was watching it and it exploded. And I remember I picked up the phone and I called my dad. And I was so upset. And he had heard about it. He said everybody at work had heard about it. And, it was just a time when again, the country came together. But I want to say it must have been 86 when the Challenger, I think it was 86 or 87 when the Challenger exploded. Well, all right, my friends, there it is. Another night, another great reading. We are moving along. Our Lithuanian family is, they're settling in, right? They're settling in. They've made some friends. Their friends are a little kooky and they're not really giving them the greatest of news. They're saying, hey, listen, this house might be, kind of haunted, or not really haunted, but, a lot of bad luck with this house. And they're kind of learning through their jobs that the people that they're working for are kind of a-holes, right? And that not only is it the business owners, but it's all the managers and all those other people too that are really kind of just not good people. So we shall see. We'll see what tomorrow brings. And, like I always tell you guys, I miss you and I wish we were back in school together. I hope that you're doing okay. I hope that you get to get outside. Let's check the weather. Anybody know the weather for tomorrow? Let's see. Today they were spot on. Rainy and warm. I think it actually hit 70 degrees. I know overnight tonight it's supposed to get a little cold, and then it's still supposed to be pretty windy. But tomorrow in the 50s, partly sunny and 50, I'll take that, right? I'll take that, partly sunny and 50. Rest of the week, though, in the 40s. Well, this weekend back up in the 50s. Well, not bad. Not bad. All right, guys, be good. I'll see you tomorrow night. We'll read on more about our Lithuanian meatpacking family in Chicago. Run the marathon, don't run the sprint. And I'll be good, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.